One of the challenges I find when reviewing so-called classic games, and here I mean specifically ones that are held in very high esteem by a broad consensus of players and reviewers, is the vague sense of pressure to like games that fall into that category. Now, most of the time, that's not really a problem, because while I do think I do quite well at going into games with an open mind and a view to making my own mind up, as a rule, I tend to hold to the opinion that when lots of people agree that a game is good, it's usually because, well, the game is good. Occasionally, however, a beloved game fails to resonate with me, and then I'm left with a strange balance of emotions, caught between knowing I need to try and explain precisely why I didn't enjoy my time with it, and giving a game enough of its deserved dues so as not to look like I'm just engaging in contrarian whining. Anyway, that's my opinion of Super Mario Bros. 3 given away then. You're listening to the almighty Backlog. I'm Ellie, and today's review is on Super Mario Bros. 3. You can play it on 3DS, Arcade, Game Boy Advance, the NES, Super Nintendo, Switch, Wii, Wii U. This review is based on the NES version. Originally released in October of 1988, developed and published by Nintendo, it's a platformer game, and How Long to Beat has an average playtime of about 6 hours. The stature and impact of Super Mario Bros. 3 is undeniable. It looms large over all the relevant conversations. Its position in the NES library, the wider Mario franchise, and the platformer genre as a whole is fairly fixed if you look it up online. It's generally included in discussions pertaining to the greatest games ever, in fact. To attempt to diminish its influence, its mechanics, or its place in the minds of people that love it is more or less a fool's errand. When I decided to play more Mario games for the blog, in an effort to close a gaping hole in my video game knowledge, I knew I'd get to Super Mario Bros. 3 sooner rather than later, and I was honestly very excited about it. The reputation it has is particularly stellar after all, and as I began to delve into these early days of the franchise with the first two Super Mario Bros. Games, I was fully expecting 3 to be one that I could spin through and relish joining my friends in crowing about its quality. That, as I'm sure you've gleaned already, is not the case. In reality, I genuinely struggled with Mario 3. The difficulty, the movement, the stage design, all of it seemed to work together in a way that held enjoying the game in a distant place far from me. This was honestly surprising. I'm by no means a great player of games, and I've certainly never made any attempt to hide or obfuscate that. And I'm not the most experienced player when it comes to traditional 2D platformers, having grown up in the era of Spyro and Crash, but I was still expecting to like Mario 3. Perhaps that's where I went wrong. I've spoken before about how I prefer to play games with as little hype as possible, so I can try and go in with no preconceived notions of quality, and I always try to approach games I review with as fair and open a mindset as possible, because there's no point rewriting a review blog if all one does is regurgitate others' opinions. That does sometimes leave me at odds with the broader consensus on a game, so then it feels like there's a sense of admittedly largely self-imposed pressure to explain why I feel differently. With Super Mario Bros. 3, the sense of hype was unfortunately inescapable. Not only is this a near 40-year-old game with as many years of glowing coverage, but it's also one that some of my friends talk about both in the retro gaming and speedrunning communities that I like to poke my head into online. So, of all the emotions I expected to feel when playing Mario 3, disappointment and frustration were not the ones I thought I'd have. I find it a little difficult to explain precisely why I felt this way, in ways that don't just come across as I was rubbish at this game, but such is the burden of deciding to write reviews, I suppose. This is compounded by the fact that I actually have quite a lot of praise to dole out for Mario 3, largely due to the ways in which this game innovates on an exceptional scale. While I didn't have fun with it, it's not hard to see why others adore it. The first and most obvious change is the addition of a world map. In previous Mario games, you progress through levels in a strictly linear fashion, delineated by world and stage. 1-1 leads to 1-2, and from there to 1-3, for example. That's still technically the case in Mario 3, but the way you go about it is more open-ended. Each world now has a themed overworld that begins fairly plain, like Grassland, which is a green zone, or Desert Hill, which is a sand zone featuring some pyramids, but they become more fantastical as you progress, such as the labyrinthine Hype Maze, which is a personal nadir for the game, or the fun Big Island, in which all the typical Mario game elements like Koopas and coin blocks are expanded to ridiculous proportions. This cements a now long-running Mario tradition of idiosyncratic level theming. Dotted about the overworlds aren't just the main stages, but also other things to see and do. Pipes, in true Mario fashion, lead to other parts of the overworld, and sometimes the paths are blocked by rocks that cut you off from a quicker route through. Mushroomoid houses and special ace spaces let you play from a selection of mini-games with Toad, which can reward you with lives or power-ups, while marauding Hammer Brothers trigger a mini-boss style micro-level where you need to defeat a couple of them in exchange for a power-up chest. All of this is in aid of finally reaching the overworld castle, or castles, since some of them are sub-boss layers for you to clear, where you take on a recurring airship level, at the end of which is one of the Koopalings, goofy boss enemies that lead Bowser's armies. What you should take from this is that one of Mario 3's draws is the level of player autonomy in tackling overworlds, especially as the game wends towards its latter stages and you have a greater repository of power-ups to call on in order to skip worlds or make your own way around the overworld. I mentioned the power-ups a couple of times, so let me elaborate on them a little. Mario 3 offers a major expansion on the mechanic compared to either of its predecessors. Obviously, you've got some of your classic upgrades in the form of a mushroom that makes Mario bigger, or the fire flower which lets him spit fireballs for a ranged attack. But there are even more options available in Mario 3. Chief among these is the leaf, which turns Mario into his raccoon form. In this form, not only does Mario gain a melee attack, as he can swing his tail to knock enemies away, but when you run and jump, he can twiddle said tail to extend his jumping range by an order of magnitude. The full Tanuki suit adds in a special option to turn into a statue that lets Mario trade movement for invulnerability. The frog suit changes the way he moves in water, and the Hammer Brothers suit gives Mario the namesake enemy's hammer throwing ability. To say that Mario 3 pushes the boat out in terms of transformation options is to undersell it. There are tons of ways to play the game because of it, and I've no doubt that experts at Mario 3 know precisely which ones to keep and when to use them. I say when to use them because another change that Mario 3 offers, and this is a notably good one in my opinion, is that you can store power-ups to use later. If you get them in a level, then they work as you'd expect, taking effect immediately and replacing anything you've got currently active. But that's not the only way you get power-ups in Mario 3. Any earned as you beat a level or in the various overworld activities go into an inventory bar at the bottom of the screen, which you can access while exploring the world map screens. From here, you can pick and choose any you want to use at that moment, applying them to Mario before you enter a level. This is yet another option that increases player agency when progressing through the game. What you collect won't be the same as other players' runs, and knowing what to use or whether to attempt levels without dipping into your stock so as to save the best for later levels is a huge part of the experience. That's sometimes easier said than done though, because Mario 3's levels get really tough. Obviously, NES games were often difficult, in part due to a holdover in design from building games for an arcade environment, where they had to bleed coins from children, and in part as a response to the lucrative games rental industry that had sprung up alongside home console gaming. But for me, Mario 3 doesn't quite get the balance right. There are other very hard NES games I reviewed that I had fun with, but others, like say Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Castlevania 3, cross that delicate line into being a torrid grind, and unfortunately, Super Mario Bros. 3 did the same for me. The first Super Mario Bros. Remains the pinnacle of the franchise for that balance, insofar as Mario games that I've reviewed at least. This is partially down to quirks in the level design, which in my opinion trend toward overloading the screen with hazards more often than not. This happens in the first game as well, but broadly more towards the end, whereas I feel like the third game, which probably had a lot to prove between the success of the first and the overdone Lost Levels, which is the other Super Mario Bros. 2 if you're in Japan, loads up the enemies and dangers very early on, and only gets harder from there. I've talked many times about how I am in no way motivated by challenging games, so it's perhaps no surprise that Mario 3 failed to resonate with me, given that it tries to push its players to their limits and rewards more strident, repeated playthroughs to reach a state of mastery. This might be a slightly more controversial opinion, but I also intensely dislike this game's sense of movement and momentum. There's a perfectly reasonable mechanic in this game that tracks when Mario starts running and, if allowed to run without stopping for a short while, lets the player know when he's hit top speed, and in turn, this augments Mario's jump. In a vacuum, this is a really neat idea. It rewards careful knowledge of the stage, and I imagine it's a very powerful tool for those who enjoy speedrunning the game. However, The way Mario actually moves and controls felt really wobbly and loose to me, as he skids and slides across the ground to what felt like an all too common death. It boggles my mind somewhat how there's inch-perfect control in Super Mario Bros. 1, but in the interests of iteration, both of its sequels have felt less precise to me. I'm left with conflicted emotions regarding Super Mario Bros. 3. On the one hand, I can certainly recognise the very tangible improvements and developments it brought to the Super Mario franchise, many of which have been retained across the years. That's testament alone to its popularity, even before we get to its indelible place in the hearts of generations of players. However, I can't, or indeed won't, discount my own personal experience, and there's no escaping that I struggle to enjoy it. It pushes the difficulty of the core Mario gameplay too far for my preference, and that results in a game that felt more frustrating than either of its predecessors. The final score is 4 out of 7. Good. Maybe something doesn't quite work, but it certainly has heart or a spark of excitement that makes it worthwhile despite the faults. Worth a go if you can find it on sale. This has been Ellie on the Almighty Backlog. You can support this project by reading the review over on thealmightybacklog.wordpress.com or by listening to the pod review hosted on RSS and YouTube. Please feel free to follow me over on Mastodon, Blue Sky and or Backlog by following the links on the blog. If you'd like to support the show financially, you can do so by donating via PayPal to thealmightybacklog@gmail.com or by hitting the donate button on the blog. Thanks for listening and have a lovely day.